Let's just jump right into it. Are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready.
Let's light this bottle rocket. Fill in the blank. Today's announcement that Notre Dame Athletic Director Jack Swarbrick will step down next year with NBC Sports Chairman and 1993 Notre Dame alum Peter Bevaqua set to replace him. His blank.
It's surprising in my opinion. I've heard the rumors that Jack Swarbrick, that his time was kind of coming up rather soon. I just never thought it would actually happen. I thought that he had many more years left in him before ultimately deciding to kind of leave as athletic director. I guess what also surprises me is what the reaction is going to be, and then going forward. Is it going to be a good thing, or is it going to be a bad thing, or is it just one of those things that doesn't really have any, altering effect on what's going on right now? So I'll be curious to see, how this last year goes for Jack. And I guess I'm curious too, like what was his overall deciding factor to kind of step down at this moment, So there's a lot of unanswered questions. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing right now is getting some of those unanswered questions answered.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by the move, but at the same time, I'm intrigued by the succession plan that they've got going on. And, Brian and I did a show this afternoon already. We were on for 3 hours talking about this. And, there's some definite questions. One of the first things Brian mentioned was, okay, you've got this successor in place. He's coming over from NBC Sports. He's got this great business background in Pete Bevaqua, but he's never worked in intercollegiate athletics before. So there's going to be a lot, for him to learn. But at the same time, Jack Swarbrick had never worked in intercollegiate athletics before. And things really, when you look at the balance sheet, they worked out pretty well for Notre Dame and Jack Swarbrick in the 15 years that he's been there. And the benefit that Bevacqua is going to have coming into this that Jack Swarbrick didn't is he's essentially going to get to be the understudy for however long this is going to last. Like Brian was saying, it will probably be before next July, July 2024, that Jack Swarbrick steps down and Bevacqua, kind of ends up being the guy himself. But in the meantime, he's going to have this time, to serve as the understudy and kind of get his feet wet and have Jack Swarbrick show him the ropes, something that, Swarbrick didn't have that advantage of. Kevin White moved on to Duke. Swarbrick took over, and, there were some things that kind of had to be learned on the fly, I guess. But I think it's going to be an interesting transition. And the biggest question, do you have, like the concern a lot of people question maybe that people have, the two biggest things that have come up so far. Does this mean Notre Dame is going to, automatically stay with NBC for the TV contract? And does this also mean that Notre Dame is headed to the Big Ten? Were either one of those things one of the biggest questions that popped into your head when this came up?
No. I biggest question that came to my mind is, who is this Pete guy, and what credentials does he have to be the athletic director? Because in my opinion, being an athletic director, it's not an easy job, and to do it with no prior experience, I'm actually a little bit concerned, to be honest with you, just because of those reasons. I feel like athletic directors should have past experience in being an athletic director, and or at least being a part of some sort of, like you said, intercollegiate sport. Maybe you're not directly the athletic director, but you have some sort of involvement, and it just really seems like that Pete has none of that. Like I just don't know who this guy is, and so when they announced it, it was quite literally like, okay, who is this guy?
I mean, it was quite literally the same thing when Jack Swarbrick took over 15 years ago. He was not a household name by any means. It worked out well. Pete Bevaqua is a Notre Dame alum. He was a walk-on for Lou Holtz, a walk-on punter in 1993. So he's been a part of the football program. He has a Notre Dame degree. I think that obviously is a factor here when you look at the fact that Swarbrick is a Notre Dame alum as well. He's got a Georgetown law degree. He worked his way up outside of TV. He came up really with the PGA is where his inroad in sports came in. And what I like about him, when you look about like what are the two biggest questions that Notre Dame has right now? The apparel deal, which is really number two, but the TV contract. They've got 1 year left on the apparel deal. They've got 2 years left on the TV contract. The TV contract is going to have to be negotiated. And so you've got the guy, the head of NBC Sports, who is also a Notre Dame alum, coming in, and he's going to be a part of that process now. And, again, I think that that's what's led some people to believe, well, this means that they're going to just stick with NBC Sports. I think personally, he's only been at NBC for 4 years. I think it personally, he's got the inner workings of what's going on at NBC. He's negotiating now on behalf of Notre Dame, not on behalf of NBC. He knows what the number is that NBC can go to. And it's going to be his legacy online when this TV contract is negotiated, and whatever happens with, joining conferences or staying independent and all these different things. So I think it's a very intriguing hire. The biggest knock on him again is like the hiring and firing of coaches and NCAA rules and regulations and all these different things. He's been on the outside of it, but the other side of it, the biggest thing that he's going to have to deal with here within the first year or so of being on the job is this TV contract. And he has negotiated rights deals on both sides of that, both for the PGA with a TV network and for NBC, with entities like the NFL, the Big Ten, the Olympics, all these different things. So I think he's a very intriguing hire. I definitely do like the fact that he's a Notre Dame alum stepping into this as well.
Yeah, I think that being a Notre Dame alumni is one of the things that is probably the most comforting of the situation. And I don't know how far that really, is going to help or take him. But there at least is some, like, it's a guy who is, like, obviously it's his alma mater, so he's got to have some passion and love for it, right? Like, it's the school that he went to. So again, that's something that is at least makes me feel better about the situation. Like, I'm sure everything will be fine and pan out. But again, it's just I not that I know every person in the world, but I've just never heard of this person before.
Honestly, I really hadn't either until a few weeks ago. The first time I think that I might have seen the name before, but when Marcus Freeman was at the Kentucky Derby with a lot of his staff and their wives a few weeks ago, last month, they were there in the NBC suite as guests of Pete Bevaqua. And that was the first time I had seen his name, that I remember anyway, was in that online diary that Katie Lonergan from Notre Dame Sports Information was doing about all of Marcus Freeman's travels. She specifically mentioned that Freeman and the staff and their wives were there as the guests of Pete Bevaqua in NBC. So I think when you look at that, like the fact that I think that that's a great sign that Pete Bevacqua was sort of forging that relationship with the head coach of the Notre Dame football team and some of the people on the staff as well, and probably a foreshadowing of this announcement earlier today. All right, fill in the blank on this next one. It's blank that ESPN.com did a ranking of the top 25 schools with the top incoming transfers and freshman classes combined, and Notre Dame is not on that list.
I think it's absurd that Notre Dame's not on that list because you look at, what was the number one thing that they needed out of the transfer portal this year? It was a quarterback. They got that. They got the best quarterback out of the portal, the guy with the most experience. How that's going to translate to Notre Dame, we don't know. But the fact that they were still able to grab, again, the top quarterback out of the portal, and we've seen, what these freshman recruiting classes have been since Marcus Freeman has been here. they've been some of the, top 10 recruiting classes in the country. So, when you combine that on top of, again, getting the best quarterback out of the portal, I just find it absurd that combination together isn't good to be in the top 25. And you start looking at some of the teams in the top 25. It's like Arizona State, Indiana, TCU, Louisville, just to name a few that
Auburn.
are like, yeah, it's just like, you're really telling me that those schools combined, again, they had the best quarterback, coming out of the transfer portal, and they're also top 10 in the recruiting classes every year. I just don't really buy it. It seems like there's maybe some sort of biasy, and maybe I'm just being a homer Notre Dame fan, but it just feels like out of all, they should at least be in the top 25. Okay, like if you don't want to put them in the top 10,
Well,
15, whatever it might be, I still believe that that they're a top 25 all in all.
Especially when you look at, because this is not just transfer portal, not just incoming freshman class. This is a combination of the two. So Notre Dame ended up with the number 12 recruiting class in the country. And then, like you said, okay, maybe they're not that impressed with Thomas Harper or Antonio Carter, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, but they got the most productive quarterback, returning in college football. The quarterback is the most important position on the field. And you look at some of the recruiting rankings of these teams that are on this top 25, Wisconsin at number 49, Maryland at 33, Arizona State at 46. So you're telling me that Arizona State's number 46 recruiting class, combined with getting Drew Pine and a couple of transfers from Idaho State and Sacramento State, is more impactful than Notre Dame adding Sam Hartman in the number 12 recruiting class in the country.
That's exactly what I was getting at. Like the combination
Right.
of those two, like I get it if the other recruits, like you said, don't, tickle you in a certain way, but they grabbed the best quarterback out of the portal, and they grabbed a guy who is, an all up there in all-time rankings in college football.
Right.
And I understand there's still questions about his game. And so maybe there's like, are those numbers inflated? Or is he really that good? But that's, you can't judge a guy unless he's gone out there and done it. You can only judge him off of what he's done so far. So you can't judge him for what he has or hasn't done yet at Notre Dame. You got to judge him on what he's done at Wake Forest. And I mean, that's just said about almost every single, college football passing record. And then you throw in again that Marcus Freeman is just killing it recruiting these freshman classes. It's like, there's just no way. I don't buy it one bit.
Yeah, and again, like UCLA, number 31 recruiting class, Louisville, number 32 recruiting class, TCU, 19, Arkansas, 22, Kentucky, 34. You just, now Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama are on this list. They're actually lower, and they obviously have really good recruiting classes that they sign. They have some of the top recruiting classes, but you can't tell me that, like, looking at UCLA with a number 31 recruiting class and Wisconsin with the number 49 recruiting class and Notre Dame at number 12, that either one of them added a player that's going to have as much impact as Sam Hartman is going to.
Well, that and not only that, but like surpass them, right? Like,
right.
Because you need to do enough to catch up to Sam Hartman. And then they're saying, well, they've done that and they're doing even more by surpassing you. And I think Irish Chi-Town brings up a good point. Like, Hartman's going to be a college football Hall of Famer.
Right.
Whatever that weight carries, he's still going to be one of the greater college football players ever. And again, combined with the number 12 recruiting class, and somehow everyone else has a combination that's just blowing past Notre Dame.
Right. Notre Dame had a higher rated recruiting class than 17 of these 25 teams alone. And then you throw on getting Sam Hartman. There's no way that they should even be outside the top 10 in this list. But yeah, they're not the top 25. Okay. All right. Clickbait. Okay. Gotcha. Which sport? Here's a question. Which sport, I guess these are all questions, but which sport would you rather see Notre Dame play a home-and-home series against? Purdue in men's basketball or football?
Oh, man. So this is tough because Notre Dame basketball is Notre Dame basketball. Like, do I get overly excited about, am I tuning in religiously, regularly to watch Notre Dame men's basketball? I'm not. Do I tune in and watch every single Notre Dame football game? I do. Has Purdue football been pretty decent? The last few years they have. Obviously, Purdue basketball has been one of the better programs in the
Number
last.
one in the nation last year. Yeah.
But still, that doesn't do a lot for me. And I've said it before on this show, probably a while back at this point. I'm a huge fan of rivalries, and especially, the football ones that involve the trophies. And I believe, if I'm right, Notre Dame and Purdue's is the gold. No, what is their trophy? I'm going to look it up real quick. Notre Dame versus Purdue.
It's been a while. I forgot what trophy. Is
Trophy.
it one of the shillelaghs?
I thought it was the golden shillelagh, and that's what I think. There's two of them. I don't know why I can't think of it. Why did it?
You just go ahead and keep talking. I'll find the trophy thing.
But yeah, I'm a fan. It is the shillelagh trophy. I'm a
Okay.
fan of
The jeweled shillelagh. Is that
just
it?
the regular shillelagh. The jeweled
regular?
shillelagh is someone else. But
I think that's USC. Yeah.
I'm just a fan of the rivalry games, and I think it means more in football than it does basketball. Notre Dame in basketball hasn't really done much to establish relationships with their in-state kind of schools, Purdue, IU, etc. They haven't. Those aren't what are considered rivalries. Notre Dame and Purdue are an established rivalry in football. There is more meaning to it. There's more history behind it. Again, there's a trophy with it. So I'm going to have to say that a home and home with Purdue is what I would prefer. And I don't think I don't think that's I think that's a good thing too, because that's not like a weak out of conference opponent. It's a Big Ten opponent. I think that it's not like Michigan playing Connecticut or, whoever their non-conference schedule is every year. But I just think it's good for all aspects. It's good for the rivalry. I have more interest in the football. And again, there's a trophy for it. So why not?
See, all that talking you did, all that means is they should be doing it in basketball and not football. Because the amount of venom spewed by Purdue when it came to those football games, like Purdue fans, I just got tired of it. The stepbrother, the stepchild syndrome. I could not take it. I did not like it. I was tired of it. To me, it was one of those games that was played every year, but it was a game that Notre Dame was supposed to win. So it was never, that much fun, and then, there were the few times in the early 2000s when Purdue would win those games.
The Drew Brees years.
And yeah, like the Drew Brees, and even after Drew Brees, like Tyrone Willingham, Charlie, like that, all those guys had some problems.
So you're basically saying it doesn't, if they win, it's just like, oh, they're supposed to win. And if they lose, it's like, well, how did you lose to Purdue?
Exactly. And it was one of those quote unquote rivalry games that was a much bigger on the part of Purdue than it was for Notre Dame. Kind of like Michigan State, like everyone talks about USC and Michigan as the rivals, but when Notre Dame was playing Michigan State and Purdue every year, in addition to those other two, you can't feel the same about every game. And Michigan, when it came to Michigan State and Purdue, those games meant much more to the other side than they meant to Notre Dame. Basketball, I mean, you hit it there at some point where like there isn't that much tradition with Notre Dame and Purdue. They've played very infrequently, but they're not that far apart. I would not mind seeing them play. Again, we're talking about a home and home. I'm not talking about it has to happen every year. Even if you ever only schedule it, like a home and, so like maybe this year they host Purdue, next year they go to Purdue, then you take a couple years off and then you do it again or something like that. I think it would be more fun to do it against basketball because there isn't nearly as much history there as there is with football. Because of the history with football, I'm not as high on that. I would just rather see them do it in basketball. And it would, like there, as we've talked about before, there aren't a lot of natural rivals for Notre Dame when it comes to basketball, especially men's basketball. Maybe this, like if they played Purdue a little bit more often, it could turn into a rivalry at some point. And right now, Notre Dame's the underdog, so why not?
Yeah, because it only looks good for Notre Dame if they win.
Yeah, yeah, and especially in terms of Notre Dame's non-conference schedules, they're never that exciting. So why not throw them on there every few years? I would be more up for that than with football. So I saw somebody throw this up there in the chat. We were going to talk about it anyway, so here we go. Everyone got excited a few weeks ago with the announcement of EA Sports, when they said they were going to pay players for their name, image, and likenesses with the return of next year's college football video game. So now news has come out that the College Football Players Association is urging eligible players to boycott the use of their likeness in the game due to the reported potential payment of $500 per player. So what do you make of this situation, Jess?
This is a tough one because you look at it on paper and you're like $500, right? Not a lot per person for what's coming out of the game.
5 years ago, $500 would have been a victory because there was no NIL and nobody was making money off anything.
Right.
But go ahead.
But you're looking at it in 2023 and the current landscape of the NIL, like $500 is a drop in the bucket. Like that's a penny compared to what a lot of these guys can get. But what you got to look at is there's like roughly 15,000 Division I players, right? And so you take 15,000 and you times that by 500. I mean, that's 7.5 million right there off the bat. Just off of 500. So if you double that and give everyone 1,000, then you're looking at $15 million.
Well, I think we can knock a couple million off because you're right, like 15,000 or whatever. 85 times 133 on scholarship is closer to 11,000, I think. So
yeah, you're right.
You're closer to like 5.6 million bucks, but still, yeah. I get your point. So then
looked up, what the college football game usually generates in revenue for EA Sports. Correct. And it's about 125 million on average. And you got to look at it too, that EA Sports hasn't done a game in a while. So I'm assuming that this new one, since hasn't been out, solid supply and demand after being gone for so long, everyone's going to rush and get it. I think they're going to have a boom in sales because it's back. Everyone's going to want it. It's going to be the new craze. So I think that number will be closer to like 150 million. Long story short, just give them $1,000 each. I think 500 is too little. I think it's kind of almost a slap in the face, in my opinion. I don't know how far I would go of like boycotting and, that kind of stuff, but I still think that they should get paid a little bit more. I would sit at $1,000. And again, you have to look at the totality of everyone that they have to pay. And it's a free $1,000. You didn't have to do anything for it. All they're going to do is slap your name on the back of a uniform in a video game. I do think that they need to get something, but I think 500 is not enough. So yeah, I'm not like outraged by it, but I do think that $1,000 would be more of a solid landing point, in my opinion.
Ed O'Bannon did not lead a class action lawsuit so that guys could make $500 for a video game. It is chump change. It is a joke. It is an insult that if $500 is the real number. Now, I think that there is a way around it where, like, does everyone across the board who's on one of these rosters have to get the same amount?
Right.
Just
do you ration it based off of starters?
Yeah, like if you're a starter, then you get maybe $1,000 or $2,000. If you are a roster player, then maybe you get between $100 and $500. You're getting something, but if you are not a star, then you don't need to be making as much as the guys who are in the starting lineup.
I think you need to go at it in a way of like there's 3 tiers: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1, your starters, your stars. Tier 2, kind of maybe a guy who sees some special teams here and there, backup. And then, tier 3, the bench warmers, the guys that you probably won't see the entire year.
Right. And then what about like Caleb Williams, for example?
Right. Heisman, how does he get the same as everyone else?
Well, not just the Heisman. And what I was going to say is, let's say he ends up being on the cover. Like Josh Allen is on the cover of the NFL game this year. Josh Allen's getting some money they don't just get to use his likeness. And by the way, Madden apparently plays NFL players 17 grand
Whew.
for their name, image, and likeness. That's
That's
a big
good little nugget there.
Now Madden is going to sell more because it's Madden, and you also have fewer NFL players, but still, the difference between 17,000 and 500 is quite substantial, especially when the guy's making 17,000 bucks. That's basically chump change to most of them because they're making millions already. But, I guess my point is, what are you paying the guy who ends up on the cover? Like, is he getting $1 million for being on the cover? Is there going to be some kind of sliding scale for all this? I think there needs to be. I don't think everybody needs to make the same amount for being in this game. Otherwise, just make up a bunch of numbers and just make it generic. I realize everybody got excited because they found out they were going to use real players in this whole thing, but just make the game and don't base it on anybody.
Well, that's the thing, is that you have two blueprints you can do it. You can do it generically, like you were talking about, and not have to pay anyone, or you can go the route that they're going. And I think that if you're going to go that route, you have to do what we were talking about. You have to pay them more, or create a tier system where, tier 1 gets 5%, tier 2 gets 2%, and tier 3 gets 1%, and whatever those equivalencies are, then that's what you're going to get. But the 500 to me just feels, again, like oh, well, we're trying here. We're not giving you nothing, but we're not going to give you much. So here's $500.
Yeah, exactly. Archer's asking if we saw the new Big Ten schedule for 24 and 25. Just glanced at it briefly because Jesse was working his day job and I was doing a 3-hour show with Brian this afternoon. It'll come up on tomorrow's show, though. We will definitely be talking about that. Baseball's new pitch clock rules have been, fairly well received for the most part, but there has been some pushback as well. There are even some fans who are calling for lower ticket prices because of the shorter games. Do you buy or sell that? I still got this bird dancing outside my window, by the way.
Huh.
You've been to many more. I haven't been to any major league games this year since the new rules. You've been to at least a handful of games, so you kind of have something to base it on. What do you think?
I'm pretty torn. For the Guardians, we do the monthly pass. So that's just like a fixed price. So for $50, I get a home ticket, standing room only for every game of that month. So that's not bad. I can't complain about that. But when I went to Wrigley, it was expensive. I do buy ultimately I buy it because I do think that if you're going to keep concession prices the same, and this is what's going to get what their logic is going to be. Well, we're selling less concessions, so why would we also lower our ticket prices as well? So it's not going to happen. But me personally, as a fan, I do believe that since your experience is shorter, and again, that everything else is, you're probably going to see a little bit of climb in concession prices to try to, catch back up to old quantities and revenue. I do think that tickets should be a little bit cheaper. And I've always been under the assumption too that like there should be a hometown discount for a lot of these people, for people who live in wherever you're at, your home team. You should do what you can to get as many of the locals there as possible. To you see these stadiums and half of them are empty, and it's like, well, if you just lowered some tickets or maybe handed out some free ones here and there, I'm sure you'd get much more better attendance.
Archer says he lived in, is it Medina before moving to Georgia? Had a great time at the Indians games a few years ago.
About 30 minutes south of here.
Yeah. I mean, this whole dilemma, like I kind of said this going in, when I'm at a game, I don't mind a longer game. I don't mind 3+ hours when I pay to go to a game and have that experience. When I'm watching on TV, it's a different story. And just like everything, they've made this decision to satisfy TV, to move things along quicker on TV. And I think it specifically is done with the idea of what happens in the postseason, because you have these 4-hour postseason games, with all the pitching changes that keep on dragging on. Now, obviously, they also wanted to bring some action to the game so there wasn't so much downtime, to get more people
Right.
interested in the games. But, this is part of the dilemma. The fact that when I'm at the game, I want it to last as long as possible because I've shelled out a lot of money. When I'm watching on TV, it's not as important. It's much less important that the games go as long. Maybe a compromise is like in the 7th inning, you start offering a concession price discount, to get like more people, to go buy more concessions before the game ends. In some cases, I think we've talked about this before, they've extended beer sales because they were never required to cut off beer sales at the 7th inning stretch. Most of them just did it out of, the whatever, if they want to call it, their own responsibility. But as we've talked about before, like alcohol sales at bars go into the wee hours of the night, and people are at bars for the sole purpose of drinking, some socializing, but drinking. Whereas when you're at a ball game, not everyone is there to get drunk. So there has to be some kind of compromise. I can't see him ever cutting ticket prices. But again, why not just offer a little bit of a concession price discount in the late innings? And maybe by, because you've already got a huge markup, and maybe by doing that, you get more people rushing to the concessions late in games to buy more stuff, whatever it happens to be. That's the best I can do. Fill in the blank. It's blank that, according to the New York Post, umpires refer to New York Yankees manager Aaron Boone as Karen in their circles.
That's pretty hilarious to me. There's nothing more than I like to hear than whether it's a Yankees player, manager, whatever it might be, any sort of I guess poking fun at or kind of making fun of. I'm all for. I've seen Aaron Boone recently. On like I have the MLB pass, so I watch a lot of the games. And he does remind me of a Karen because he's always whining and complaining and chirping from the dugout. And it's just, at some point, it's got to get annoying. Like, my biggest qualm with the NBA this year is guys seem to cry about wanting fouls after almost every play, it seems like. And I feel like he is the equivalent in the MLB. He's just always complaining about something every single game. And I'm sure the umpires know that. They're like, oh, what's Boone gonna, complain about today? Or what's he gonna, get upset about today? And it just has to get annoying after a while. So I think it's funny. It's obviously gotten to the point where they don't take him seriously anymore. And it's just kind of become a big joke to them.
And apparently they don't, they don't press the issue, like with Major League Baseball or anything more, because they want him to keep his job, because they don't want to help out the Yankees, according to the Post in this report, which is hysterical. I just think it's hilarious that Boone has this reputation because he's already annoyed most of the Yankees fans. I think that they're sick of him at this point as well. But again, like, unless you're a Yankees fan, I don't think there's going to be too many tears shed for you. So, but you're absolutely right. He's like, he obviously has the reputation as one of the worst. Sometimes you just got to sit down and shut up and not be chirping all the time. So I think it's great. Well, that's it for today. We flew right through that.
I thought we had the Penn State schedule.
Now, we were going to do that, but I'm gonna save that as well because we added on some of the other stuff for today.
So we're postponing it.
Yes.
Well, everyone will have to eagerly wait my Penn State prediction then.
All right. Will you be here tomorrow?
There is a very good chance that I will be.
All right. Excellent. I'm glad that you will be. And by the way, question from Tommy Guns. Can we get the actual pronunciation on her name? He is speaking of Niele Ivy, not Niall Ivy. Niele Ivy. You know who I'm talking about if you know who I'm talking about. All right, Jess, great stuff from you. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And, of course, smash the like button on your way out. Subscribe, rate, and review. We will be back tomorrow with Jesse and Vince. He will be here as well. First 3-man booth in a few weeks, I think. So looking forward to that. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Friday's Rapid Fire on IB Nation Sports Talk.